On a sweltering summer afternoon in Willow Creek, the neighborhood lay bathed in golden light. White picket fences gleamed along manicured lawns, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly mown grass. Officer Osiris Hawthorne, a veteran of 22 years on the force, sat behind the wheel of his patrol car. The hum of the engine and the relentless buzz of cicadas were the only sounds as he surveyed the quiet street. In all his years of service, Osiris had learned to trust his instincts, his so-called sixth sense, to alert him the moment something felt out of place. Across the road, a young black woman appeared jogging at a steady pace. Her stride was confident and fluid, her athletic gear crisp and well-fitted. She wore a dark running gown and form-fitting leggings, her hair pulled back so neatly that not a strand fell loose. Earbuds nestled in her ears, and she glanced neither left nor right as she passed Osiris's vehicle. In that moment, Osiris felt a twinge of discomfort. He prided himself on being part of a well-ordered community where every resident acknowledged the presence of law enforcement with a respectful nod. This woman's indifference struck him as a challenge. Pride welled up in Osiris's chest. 22 years of patrolling these streets had taught him that unusual behavior often heralded trouble. Now he interpreted her calm composure and focused gaze not as personal discipline, but as deliberate disregard, perhaps even as reconnaissance. Convinced that she must be casing the neighborhood, he eased the car into drive, signaling his intent to follow. As the hot breeze drifted through the lowered window, Osiris braced himself. He would find out once and for all what a jogger had to hide. Zahara Lowell, now 35, recently appointed as the new precinct commander, was simply out for her daily run. She wore a lightweight windbreaker over her exercise top, form-fitting leggings, and well-worn trainers. Earbuds blocked out the world, her favorite playlist, keeping her pace steady. To her, Willow Creek was home, an orderly enclave of gracious estates and quiet streets, and today's jog was as routine as her morning coffee. Passing row after row of grand homes, she paid no mind to their ornate gates or immaculately trimmed hedges. Her thoughts floated between department meetings and community outreach plans, not the patrol car that now followed her. To Zahara, these streets represented the promise of balanced policing and mutual respect, until now unchallenged by fear or prejudice. In the squad car behind her, Osiris Hawthorne frowned. "A runner who doesn't even glance at a marked cruiser," he muttered under his breath. In his 22 years on the force, he had learned that courtesy toward officers was a small sign of shared trust. This woman's calm disregard felt like an insult, and in his view, a red flag. He flipped on the rooftop lights, the blue and red glow slicing through the late afternoon calm. As Zahara slowed to a stop, her breath steady, arms uncrossed, Osiris pulled in alongside her, leaving just 6 yards between them. He shut off the engine and swung open the door. Osiris stepped onto the pavement with deliberate confidence. He placed a hand on his duty belt, the other resting near his holster, and leaned forward slightly. In one smooth motion, he let the badge at his hip catch the sunlight. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "this is a police matter. I need to know what you're doing here." Zahara paused, the earbuds dangling, as the two faces, seasoned officer and new chief, locked in that moment of mutual appraisal. She paused, removed one earbud, and met his gaze with calm composure. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked softly. The warmth of the late afternoon sun caught the sweat at her brow, but her voice remained steady, betraying no hint of anger or fear. Osiris took a small step forward, closing the distance between them, and folded his arms over his chest. His face, usually open and affable, had hardened into a mask of suspicion. "Where are you coming from?" he asked, tone-clipped and businesslike. She followed his finger, pointing down the quiet street behind her. "From my home," she replied. "I just finished my run." She brushed a stray lock of hair back into her ponytail, then tucked the remaining earbud into her pocket. Her relaxed posture and measured speech did little to soothe Osiris's fraying temper. He shifted his weight, flexed his fingers near his holster, and said, "Can I see some identification?" She met his request with polite firmness. "I'm not required to carry ID while jogging," she explained. There was no edge to her voice, only gentle clarity. Still in Osiris's mind, her refusal to produce a card bordered on defiance. Good citizens, he believed, cooperated without hesitation. Obedience was a small price to pay for communal trust. Her answer seemed to inflame him further. He recalled every training module he'd ever taken. Cooperation builds safety. Now his internal narrative insisted that any refusal, however lawful, must be a sign of guilt. He straightened, squared his shoulders, and decided in that instant that polite inquiry would not suffice. Before another word passed her lips, he reached for his radio and announced Unit 47 to dispatch. I have a subject refusing to cooperate with a lawful stop. Request K9 unit and backup. He barely registered her startled blink as he turned away, his mind already racing ahead to the next steps in ensuring neighborhood security. Despite the unruffled beat of her own pulse, she watched his retreating back with a quiet resolve, knowing that today's run had just become much more than exercise. Feeling her calm confidence as a challenge, Osiris closed the gap in 2 quick steps and yanked at Zahara's wrist as she reached for her phone. Pain flared across her forearm as the cold metal of handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists. She gasped, pain and shock mingling in her eyes while Osiris tightened them just enough to leave red marks on her skin. Zahara cried out, her voice ringing through the quiet street like an alarm. Instantly, neighbors stirred from their afternoon routines. An elderly man on his porch dropped his newspaper, peering over his glasses in surprise. A teenager walking his dog skidded to a halt leash, taut eyes wide at the scene unfolding before him. Even the mail carrier paused mid-step, her bag full of letters swinging as she watched. Osiris leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear, and whispered, "You should have cooperated when I asked." His tone carried both accusation and a misguided sense of triumph, proof in his mind that he'd reasserted control. But Zahara did not shrink. She met his glower with steady, unyielding resolve. "You've made a serious mistake, officer," she said, voice low but unwavering. "You don't even know who I am." Her words cut through the tension like a blade. The street, once hushed in the heavy heat, seemed to hold its breath. Zahara's posture remained proud, shoulders back, even as the cuffs bit into her skin. Neighbors exchanged worried glances, some reaching for their phones to record, others opening their doors in alarm. The afternoon light glinted off Osiris's badge, but it was Zahara's quiet strength that shone brightest. In that moment, the assumptions that had put her in handcuffs dissolved into thin air, and a new uncomfortable truth settled over Willow Creek. Prejudice and power might speak loudly, but dignity and truth speak louder still. In the thickening tension, a middle-aged man in a crisp gray suit stepped onto the curb. His brow was furrowed in concern as he approached the pair. "Officer, what's going on here?" he asked, voice calm but firm. Osiris straightened, glancing at the newcomer with thinly veiled irritation. "This is police business," he replied curtly. "Sir, please step back." But the man did not budge. Folding his arms, he met Osiris's gaze unwaveringly. "She was out for a run," he said. "Are you telling me that's a crime? Why is she in handcuffs?" His quiet challenge cut through the afternoon stillness, forcing Osiris to hesitate. Neighbors watched from driveways, their eyes shifting between the officer and the unarmed woman in cuffed wrists. Before Osiris could fire back another retort, the unmistakable rumble of an approaching engine shook the block. Heads turned as a sleek black SUV roared into view, tires crunching over gravel. The vehicle slid to a stop mere feet away, its dark windows reflecting the shocked faces of Willow Creek. The street, once peaceful, now braced itself for what came next. Late that afternoon, a powerful black SUV slipped to a halt at the curb and its door swung open. Captain Rafael Rodriguez, tall, reserved, and weathered by decades of service, stepped onto the pavement, his face set in a stern, unreadable expression. He surveyed the scene in one deliberate glance, the assembled neighbors, the handcuffed woman, and Officer Hawthorne's trembling stance. Raising a single hand, he spoke with calm authority. "Release her, right now." Osiris Hawthorne. His hands shook as he unlocked the cuffs, the metal's cold bite leaving angry red welts on Zahara's delicate wrists. She rubbed them gingerly, her composure intact despite the pain. Captain Rodriguez knelt beside her and offered a gentle inquiry. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Zahara lifted her chin, brushing back a stray curl, and nodded. She dabbed the raw skin with a napkin from her pocket, refusing to make a fuss. Straightening, Rodriguez turned to his subordinate, his voice dropping to a hard whisper that nevertheless carried to every ear on the block. "Do you understand what you have done?" he asked, his gaze locked on Osiris. The neighborhood held its breath. Even the late afternoon sun seemed to dim as Osiris swallowed his bravado, evaporating under the weight of that question. A long, heavy silence followed before he managed to shake his head, stunned by the realization that the person he'd so quickly judged was not only innocent, but his own chief of police. Osiris stammered, voice cracking, "I didn't know." Captain Rodriguez's eyes narrowed with a hint of bitter irony. You saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just a woman finishing her run, he said quietly. The soft rustle of summer leaves and distant hum of passing cars contrasted starkly with the charged silence that had fallen over Willow Creek. Osiris shifted uncomfortably, the realization settling in that there was no official report to justify his actions, only his own prejudices. He glanced around at the sea of smartphones raised like watchful sentinels. Neighbors' faces, once passive, now bore expressions of quiet reproach. A woman in her garden held up her phone, the screen glowing with the video of his mistake. A teenager at the curb lowered his device and called out with clear disdain, "You've just shattered your own credibility." The weight of those words cut deeper than any reprimand. Osiris's heart pounded, and for the first time in his long career, he felt the sting of public shame. His uniform, once a symbol of authority and protection, felt heavy and hollow. Captain Rodriguez, still standing nearby, placed a steady hand on Osiris's shoulder. "This district looks to us to keep them safe," he said softly but firmly. "Today you let them down by turning fear into force without cause." Around them, Willow Creek exhaled. The afternoon sun peeked through rooftops once more, and the gentle rustle of leaves resumed. But for Osiris Hawthorne, nothing would ever sound the same. Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the heavy air. "Officer Hawthorne, you are suspended without pay, effective immediately. Hand over your badge and firearm." The words rang like a verdict. Osiris's hands trembled as he unclipped the shiny shield from his chest, the metal cold and heavy in his palm. He unbuckled his service weapon from its holster, laying it carefully on the hood of his patrol car as neighbors watched in solemn stillness. Slowly, Zahara stepped forward. There was no anger in her eyes now, only a quiet gravity that seemed to pierce Osiris's very soul. She met his gaze and spoke softly. "Imagine if I weren't the police chief, what would have happened then?" Her words hung between them like a question too large for any answer. The world seemed to hold its breath as Osiris stared down at the badge, the symbol of 22 years of service, now a token of a single 5-minute mistake. The sun dipped lower and Willow Creek returned to its gentle hum, leaving Osiris alone with the weight of his choices. News of the incident exploded across social media within hours. Videos shot by onlookers flooded timelines under the hashtags jogging, While Black and Riverside police drawing outrage from coast to coast. Local news outlets picked up the story and city officials convened an emergency press conference. The mayor publicly apologized for the department's actions, promising full transparency and accountability. An independent review board was immediately assembled comprising community leaders, legal experts, and civil rights advocates to audit every officer's disciplinary record and to recommend systemic reforms. Meanwhile, Officer Hawthorne found himself at the center of a nationwide conversation about racial profiling and police culture. Once a respected veteran, he was now required to attend a mandatory retraining program on implicit bias de-escalation tactics and community policing principles. The curriculum, developed in partnership with local universities and advocacy groups, forced him to confront his own prejudices in group workshops and one-on-one counseling sessions. It was a personal reckoning he had neither sought nor expected. Throughout Willow Creek, community meetings were scheduled in every neighborhood. Residents, both supporters and skeptics, gathered to discuss their experiences with local law enforcement, to share stories, and to demand meaningful change. Flyers for town halls and listening sessions appeared on front doors and in church bulletins. Grassroots organizations like Riverside United gained new members almost overnight, channeling collective grief into activism. For Zahara, the police chief, this watershed moment carried both triumph and sorrow. She oversaw the launch of a new body camera policy and spearheaded transparency initiatives, posting quarterly audit results online and opening a civilian review panel. Yet she could not erase what had happened, nor fully heal the community's wounded trust. As training wheels for a new era of policing went into place, Willow Creek stood at a crossroads, determined to prove that from the ashes of scandal could rise a more just, equitable model of public safety. Even after enduring physical pain, the chief held fast to her leadership role, determined to turn a personal ordeal into systemic change. Under her guidance, every officer in Willow Creek now undergoes annual bias assessment training, a structured program blending real-world scenarios with reflective discussion. A new Justice for Citizens hotline was launched, staffed by trained ombudsmen, available around the clock to receive complaints, track investigations, and report back to the community in quarterly transparency reports. Slowly, the streets once defined by whispered fears and silent judgments began to soften. Neighbors noticed patrol cars pausing for friendly waves instead of suspicious stares, and public forums replaced roadside confrontations. Local churches opened their doors for dialogue nights, and schools invited officers to speak about respect, rights, and responsibility. While no single policy could erase decades of bias, the neighborhood's commitment to accountability and restraint grew stronger with each meeting, each training session, and each call to the new hotline. In Willow Creek, a tragedy that could have deepened divisions instead became the catalyst for a more open, just, and compassionate community, proof that even the smallest acts of courage can reshape an entire system. 6 months have passed since that sweltering afternoon in Willow Creek, and the neighborhood's quiet resilience has begun to pay real dividends. The Justice for Citizens hotline now fields dozens of calls each week, and its first quarterly report showed that 70% of complaints were tracked to meaningful follow-up, something unheard of in this precinct before. Officers attend monthly workshops on implicit bias led by community volunteers, as well as outside experts, and new recruits are tested on de-escalation scenarios before ever stepping into a patrol car. Even former Officer Hawthorne has been seen volunteering at local schools, helping teach students about their rights and the importance of mutual respect. On weekend mornings, groups of runners gather at the park where the incident once unfolded, black and white, young and old, wearing Running Good Light t-shirts that bear no slogans, but carry a powerful message of unity. Chief Lowell hosts a quarterly open station day, inviting families in for coffee and conversation, while her deputies serve as greeters rather than enforcers. Faith leaders, business owners, and retirees now sit side by side with officers on the Citizen Review Board, ensuring every policy change reflects the voices of those it affects. There is still work to be done. Some residents remain wary, and bias cannot be erased overnight. Yet crime reports in Willow Creek are down. Community police surveys show rising trust, and invitations for dialogue outnumber the old calls for confrontation. What began as a painful mistake has become a turning point, proof that even a short lapse in judgment can spark a movement toward greater transparency, accountability, and compassion when brave voices refuse to stay silent. 6 months later, Willow Creek still moves at its unhurried pace, but its heartbeat now includes the steady rhythm of progress. 1 year later, Willow Creek stands as a case study in community renewal. The Justice for Citizens hotline has matured into a fully staffed ombuds office housed at the precinct, complete with its own meeting room, where residents can bring concerns in person. Last spring's pilot workshops on implicit bias have expanded into a certification program that every officer completes annually. Recruit classes now spend their first week paired with neighborhood ambassadors, teachers, shopkeepers, pastors, learning local history, and listening to lived experiences. The running group born from that fateful afternoon has grown into Stride for Solidarity, an annual charity 5K that fills Maple Street with hundreds of participants raising funds for local civil rights scholarships. Chief Lowell is a regular sight at these events, cheering alongside joggers and high-fiving neighbors. Osiris Hawthorne, now a community liaison rather than a street officer, speaks openly at city council meetings about the dangers of unexamined bias in his own journey toward accountability. His badge was restored after rigorous retraining, but he carries it differently now, clipped to a lanyard at his desk, a reminder that policing must serve, not preside. Perhaps most remarkable is the Citizen Review Board itself. What started as a handful of volunteers has become a 19-member council representing every corner of the Heights. Their quarterly reports are published online, complete with actionable recommendations and tracked outcomes. Local schools have added civics units inspired by the Willow Creek story, teaching students how ordinary people can hold institutions to their highest ideals. Of course, prejudice never vanishes entirely. A stray comment, a wary glance still surface now and then. But 1 year on, those moments are met not with silence or resignation, but with constructive dialogue. Willow Creek has learned that true safety springs not from unchallenged authority, but from relationships built on transparency, empathy, and the courage to acknowledge mistakes. In this quiet suburb, justice has become a lived practice, proof that when a community chooses to listen, real change follows. Note: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.